Before we dive into today's head scratcher of an episode, I want to read one of the definitions of permissive will that I found on godquestions.org. I will be replacing God with Yahweh because it helps me put distance between what I believed in and what I am currently deconstructing. Here we go. With Yahweh's sovereign will, he chooses to permit many things to happen that he takes no pleasure in. Yahweh's allowance of certain things, even sinful things, that indirectly accomplish his will is often called Yahweh's permissive will. As Yahweh's moral creations exercised their free will, however, they chose disobedience and sin entered the world. Yahweh's perfect world did not include death, suffering, disease, and other consequences of sin. Yet, Yahweh allowed these things as part of his permissive will. We experience Yahweh's permissive will every day. Yahweh allows us to make decisions: what we eat, how we spend our time, where we work, whom we marry, and much more. In Yahweh's permissive will, evil is allowed to function, but Yahweh's perfect plan triumphs every time. For example, Yahweh allowed the kidnapping and enslavement of Joseph. At every mistreatment of Joseph, here we go, Yahweh had the power to intervene, but he permitted, quotes, that's in quotes, the evil. And in that limited sense, limited meaning our own limited understanding, let's be clear, I do not believe that God Questions is saying that Yahweh has the limited sense. And in that limited sense, he sovereignly willed it to happen. It's important to note that Yahweh's permissive will never counteracts his sovereign will or his overarching plan. Yahweh allowed the sins of Joseph's brothers in order to bring about a greater good. And they say, see Genesis 50 verse 20. And I guess I have to quote this. And this is Joseph speaking. As for you, you meant evil against me, but Yahweh meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Now that we have a basic understanding of permissive will according to godquestions.org, let's dive into the birth and early life of Moses. This Bible story has all the markings of a dramatic narrative here. We have danger, desperation, and a mysterious act of defiance. The deeper you look, the more the questions start to pile up. Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, feels threatened by the rapid population growth of the Israelites. Essentially, an enslaved people suddenly seemed like a potential army to Pharaoh. And what was his solution to this problem? He put out an execution order on every Hebrew baby boy. Here we go again. Here we go again with another mass unaliving order. We are just 4 episodes in. An entire generation of male infants is wiped out because of one man's paranoia. But what does Pharaoh's reprobate, because it was reprobate, what does his reprobate order say about Yahweh's chosen people and their situation? Did Pharaoh have a right to feel threatened? Because after all, Israel's supposed divine protection was not the driving force behind Pharaoh's order. It was their growing population and the chance of a bloody uprising that threatened Pharaoh's peace of mind. Regardless of the driving point behind Pharaoh's decision, his order was 100% unethical. And Yahweh permitted it to happen because permissive will. We will return to the massacre in a minute. Let us shift our attention to sweet baby Moses. He is born under these grim circumstances, and right from the start, right from the jump, his life is at risk. His mother hides him for 3 months, props to her. And when she can no longer keep him safe, she places him in a basket and sets him adrift on the Nile. The river Nile, by the way. Nothing to see here. Just your regular Old Testament parenting at play. Sending her son out on the Nile was an act of desperation, but also one perhaps of profound hope. Because what kind of person chooses to send her child floating down a river? Was she relying entirely on fate? Or perhaps divine intervention? Was there a visitation from an angel that was not recorded in the Christian Bible? Did she have a dream? Did she hear the voice of Yahweh? Did she have a moment of doubt? Did she wonder if she was dooming her son or saving him? The biblical text doesn't tell us, but it does leave us to wonder. Now here's where things get interesting. Moses is discovered by none other than Pharaoh's daughter. Plot twist! The daughter of the very man who ordered his unaliving ends up saving his life. Is this a divine twist of irony? Or does it hint at something more complex? Perhaps a flaw in Pharaoh's own household, because how does that even happen? And let's not forget that Pharaoh's daughter knew Moses was a Hebrew child, but she decides to raise him in the palace anyway. Could we see this as an act of defiance against her father? Or did she see something in this baby that others didn't? Perhaps the same thing that Moses' mother saw in him after he was born. How does this defiance rescue play into the larger narrative of Moses eventually leading his people out of Egypt? Because you cannot deny the irony. You cannot deny the plot twist. You cannot deny just the weight of that rescue, of what it meant. And I have to ask, why did Yahweh put Moses, a child, in such a precarious position? Did Yahweh soften Pharaoh's heart, holding him back from unaliving Moses right there in the palace? If yes, why didn't Yahweh do the same for the other precious baby boys? This story sincerely boggles the mind. Now, while all of this is happening, Yahweh appears to be notably silent. I mean, we saw what happened with Abel. We saw what happened. Okay, so this silence is not surprising. There's no booming voice from the heavens and no divine intervention until much, much later. Hey, Yahweh, why the delay? Why allow Moses to be raised in the house of his people's oppressor? Was this part of some grand, inscrutable plan? Or was it simply the result of human actions and decisions? Again, playing into the conversation of free will, choice, human choice versus the permissive will of Yahweh. This brings us to the concept of Yahweh's permissive will. If you need to recharge or refresh your memory, just go back to the introduction, okay? Yahweh's permissive will is a theological idea that attempts to explain why an all-powerful deity would allow evil to occur. According to this concept of permissive will, Yahweh permits certain things, even sinful things, to happen within his sovereign will. So we're dealing with the permissive will, and then we're dealing with his sovereign will. These are two different things. But, and this is a big but, because you must know, you must believe that Yahweh takes absolutely no pleasure in the evil things that are occurring. He doesn't like it. As long as you guys are aware that he may permit it to happen, but you must know that Yahweh takes absolutely no pleasure in them. These events, while seemingly chaotic or unjust, are allowed to play out because they indirectly accomplish Yahweh's larger plan. Tis a gamble, tis a bet, tis a game. Okay? It's all about what Yahweh permits to happen. And no matter what he permits to happen or allows to happen, it all plays a role in his larger plan, aka his sovereign will. But here's the kicker, another but. If Yahweh is omnipotent, why allow such atrocities in the first place? Pharaoh's decree to unalive innocent Hebrew infants is one of the darkest moments, and there are many dark moments in the Christian Bible, but this is one of the darkest moments in the Christian Bible, and yet Yahweh permits it. Why? Permissive will is not enough of an explanation or a reason. I still ask myself, why? Why was it necessary for those babies to be unalived so that the stage could be set for Moses' eventual rise as a deliverer? Why did these two things have to even connect? Couldn't Yahweh have stopped? He could have. Couldn't Yahweh have stopped Pharaoh without undermining his power or his plan? Because is he not the omnipotent God? Is he not the one who created the heavens and the earth? Is he not the one who made the sun stand still? Is he not the one who parted the Red Sea? Who waged a bloody war against the Egyptian army? Surely he is able to stop something knowing that his sovereign will is still his sovereign will, regardless of what he touches or what he doesn't touch. After all, Yahweh later sends 10 plagues to torment the Egyptians. Why didn't he intervene sooner to prevent the mass unaliving of his chosen people's sons? There were human beings involved in this. Innocent babies. Why? While we're still thinking through those questions, we have to discuss the matter of Moses' dual identity. Oh, identity is a buzzword in charismatic communities, by the way. The good old days. So Moses is raised as an Egyptian prince, but by birth, he's an Israelite. Talk about being caught between two worlds without your consent. Imagine growing up with the privileges of royalty while knowing deep down, that your true identity lies with an enslaved people. Perhaps Moses' Hebrew roots were kept alive by the Hebrew maids who might have tended to him, or maybe even by his own mother who nursed him for 3 months in those early years. Or perhaps some Christians might present this argument. Perhaps Yahweh was the one guiding him. Perhaps Yahweh was the one speaking to him in the dead of the night while Moses slept on Egyptian cotton. Perhaps Yahweh whispered things to him. Perhaps. Did these early influences cause Moses to see through the facade of Egyptian royalty, thereby creating an identity crisis? And let's dig a little deeper. As Moses grew, how did his inner conflict manifest? Was his eventual act of unaliving the Egyptian taskmaster an outburst of repressed identity, repressed anger, repressed rage? A moment where his true heritage finally broke through the surface? Or was it the culmination of years of living in a world where he didn't truly belong? On a deeper level, the birth and early life of Moses is a story about the psychological toll of living between two worlds, of seeing your people, your brothers, people who look like you, being beaten, enslaved, chained, treated poorly, abused, all the while watching them from within the palace walls. That has to mess with the psychology of anyone. More so, a man who, at only 3 months old, was placed in a basket by his primary caretaker and sent off on the River Nile. Perhaps this is a story of a man, of a boy who grew up to be both a prince and an outcast. His identity crisis is central to understanding his journey. Because was Moses ever really at peace with who he was? Or was he always running from one identity toward another because he hadn't dealt with the root issues? He was abandoned as a child. He was. And then he was raised in the palace by the daughter of a man who put out a mass execution order on people who looked like him. Let's circle back to the concept of permissive will, and I'll begin to round up. We're told that Yahweh allowed Pharaoh to exercise his free will, even though it led to the slaughter of countless Hebrew infants. This permissive will is often used to shield Yahweh from scrutiny, suggesting that while Yahweh allowed these events to unfold, it was ultimately part of a grander plan. But is that a satisfactory enough explanation for everyone? It isn't for me. I don't think it was necessary for Yahweh to permit such evil to function while he was cooking up his own plan to use Moses as a deliverer. I don't think A had to do with B. I don't think A needed to be involved in B's story. Couldn't Yahweh have found a less gruesome way to map out Moses' eventual role and future as a deliverer, as a prophet, as a mediator? Or does this permissiveness serve as a way to justify the seemingly unjustifiable? Same thing that happened with the Cain and Abel story. How can we justify this? How can we justify this behavior by Yahweh? Does this narrative not challenge the notion of Yahweh as a protector? Does it not reveal a deity who is more complex than we could ever imagine? Does it reveal in a small way the indifference to the immediate suffering of the Israelites in pursuit of a larger goal? We have to ask these questions. As we think through these questions, remember the goal isn't about finding definite answers. I don't think I will ever find definite answers. But it's really about digging deeper into the text, questioning the narrative, and exploring the complexity of these ancient stories that were taught to us as stories that could be applied in our modern lives, but not really, because now in 2024, if a leader, if a president, if a monarch puts out such an order, I believe everyone around the world will rise up and revolt against it. Moses' story is far from straightforward. I will admit that. And maybe that's the point. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep questioning.